Welcome again to another episode of the Washington SXM podcast. As always, like, share, and subscribe. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you can get notified whenever I drop a new video, which is daily. I drop a video every day, so you just check back in and you can continue. Today we're going back to the king from Congo that defeated the Portuguese in the and returned some of the slaves back from Brazil back to Africa. So let's get into it.
Battle of Mbumbi in 1622 was a terrible event for the citizens of Congo. A power-hungry Portuguese governor at the time sought to take full control of the African empire with his invasion. After the defeat, thousands of Congo citizens were enslaved and taken to Brazil. Some historians have a tendency to end the story there.
Stick up in there. But man, this is in 1622. This is when the Portuguese had just went to when they went to the Congo. But this wasn't the first time they visited the Congo, because remember the Brazil, I did a video on the Ottoman Empire, and also another one when the Brazil was the first ones to do the transatlantic slave trade, because they had ships. They were the first to have ships to travel from Brazil to Africa to get a slave. So they were the first to enslave. They wasn't the first to enslave. They was the first to bring slaves across the ocean, the Brazilians. So this is why he said that they enslave, they take thousands of slaves from the Congo, specifically from the Congo, back to Brazil in 1622.
But upon revisiting this history, scholars like John Thornton and Andrea Mosterman discovered a little-known fact about that brief war. Congo not only retaliated, but they were able to defeat the Portuguese and reconquer some lost territory. In a sense, this could be considered a Congolese reconquista, if you will. The Congo Empire first established their...
Stick up in. I don't know if he's gonna say it, but I had some research already on this. From another video I did. You can go and check out the other video that I did about the slave trade back then. But in 1641 or 42 is when the new king of the Congo had went to war and defeated the Portuguese. I think you might hear it in this video because this is on that specific time period, so let's get into it.
Relationship with Portugal in 1483, when Portuguese sailors under Diogo Cao arrived at the Congo River and established a long-lasting relationship with the Mwene Congo, or King NKANGA. Christianity was introduced for the first time to the Bakongo elite, and from there, the ruling class viewed Portugal as a sort of Christian brother, which was...
Stick up in, and this is where I always tell people, even when I have conversations about slavery back then, the only reason they get to defeated Africa on such a large scale is because they introduced Christianity to Africa, and then what they did, they give Christianity to the elites. Remember, Africa was enslaving Africans then, so the elites was having slaves, so they enslaved the minds of the elite, then put it away, and then they in turn used Christianity to trample across Africa, and then in that sense, what they did, they destroyed all of the original religion of African. That's why half of us today don't have no clue what we used to worship back then in ancient times. Let's continue. So Christianity is, they use it to conquer the entire continent. Facts.
It's obviously their first mistake. Almost a century later, this Christian brotherhood would take its first tangible form with a request from King Alvaro I of Congo, asking the Portuguese for military assistance against the so-called Jagas. The Jagas apparently forced him to abandon his capital. True colors were revealed immediately after the request, as the Portuguese were more than willing to send troops.
Of course, because they wanted the Congo. It was rich.
Congo unfortunately granted Portugal that colony, which later became known as Luanda. Luanda was important to Portugal because they could now have a foundation to operate in for their colonization efforts. The alliance between Portugal and Congo was still strong, even at the end of the 16th century, but Portuguese ambitions to further their colonial development, control trade from the whole coast, including seeking the exclusion of Dutch merchants from Congo and capture slaves in warfare, put it under great stress. The breakdown in the relationship with Congo came to a boiling point once Portuguese governors in the region allied with a very powerful African group known as the Mbangala.
Stick up in, and that's what that's what the colonizers did back then as well. When you reject Christianity, and we have seen there's other books written on this as well. Like whenever they reject Christianity, whoever accepted Christianity, whoever came, which is the English, the Portuguese, the Arabs, or Europeans, they find someone who they can manipulate, and then they join with that person and then use that African those African tribe or warriors to attack the next tribe because they don't align with them with their Christianity. So this was a weapon used because Africa was filled with warriors. They couldn't, the colonizer, the enslavers didn't have enough firepower to conquer Africa on a whole. So what they had to do, they had to join with the warriors there to take over other tribes and colonize it and so forth and so forth and so forth and so on. Let's continue.
Scholars aren't exactly sure as to the identity of the Mbangala, but they were known as very fierce warriors and were feared throughout the region. This Portuguese Mbangala union was a match made in heaven for the Portuguese as they conquered the kingdom of Ndongo. This event was
that's how they conquered other kings. They used an next tribe, conquer another tribe.
Were enslaved and taken to Brazil. The torture of that invasion is just too graphic to describe.
I could only imagine.
But just know that the Mbangala wreaked havoc all over the kingdom. This flawless victory and union gave the new Portuguese governor, João Sousa, the confidence needed to take on Congo itself. His first target was a vassal of Congo located north of Luanda. This place was known as a refuge for runaway slaves. Sousa's continued advance led to the total breakdown of Congo-Portuguese relations
I could only imagine.
Eventually leading to the Battle of Mbumbi. Sousa was power-hungry. With his African allies, he defeated Congo at the Battle of Mbumbi, enslaving not only the average citizens, but also the very elite. It was so bad.
Those same Christians who turned their back against their own
spoke out against it, including Portuguese merchants living in Congo. Again, the Jesuits stressed the interests of Portugal and Portuguese because, in their long letter, they included a verbatim transcript of a letter written by 55 Congo-based Portuguese merchants to beg the governor to remove his army from Congo,
55
or they
bases
would
in
all
Congo
be ruined, if
from the
not
Portuguese.
killed.
I think it was more, but they were saying that because they don't want to make it look
Congo, and the new king at the time, NKANGA, also known as Pedro II, was ready for war.
This king,
however, despite the outcry
listen to this, what this king did.
NKANGA managed to keep his composure and not do anything too reactionary. The new king of Congo, while mobilizing an army to counterattack, ordered all of those Portuguese who could to assemble with his army when it camped at Mbandakasi, an unidentified location in the vicinity of Mbumbi, so that he could put them under royal protection. For this, some in his court accused him of being king of the Portuguese for not having sought vengeance against the resident Portuguese.
You know how difficult it was for a king to do that?
Despite the clear insults and tremendous...
Stick up in. You know how hard it was, how difficult it was for a king to protect those who enslaved thousands of his own people? But that's a wise king. He didn't use emotions, or he used logic. He wasn't pushed into doing something he will regret. That's why I always tell people, whenever you're angry or someone is pushing you to do something, take a step back, calm yourself down, and then use logic. Don't use fear in anything, because you will never win when you use fear. When you use logic, you become a master.
This pressure, via hindsight, King NKANGA proved to be a well-balanced ruler, advancing wisdom and courage. Even though killing all the Portuguese in his region would have been very easy to do, he focused his energy on the real target, the Portuguese governor Sousa, while simultaneously protecting innocent Portuguese merchants. I'm sure that was no easy task for that time. King NKANGA not only mobilized his army and protected Portuguese residents, but he also wrote letters to the Vatican, the King of Spain, and to the Dutch. Congo's powerful army was going to rain down on the Portuguese and the Mbangala in full force, and the Dutch witnessed it all. The Dutch summary describes a great victory following the initial defeat won by Pedro's army and that of his subordinate ruler, the Count of Soyo, in whose lands the Dutch were established, which drove the Portuguese out of Congo territory. It also describes the violent anti-Portuguese riots that followed this, and that included the disarming and humiliation of Portuguese residents throughout the kingdom.
Don't forget, they were warriors, Africans then.
The Dutch merchants were probably witnesses. João Sousa
stick up in. And this is what our allies tell people. Africa didn't get colonized by Westerners or the enslavers coming to Africa and defeating the warriors there, because Africa has some of the strongest warriors, the most skillful warriors. So even though the enslavers came with firearms when it was invented, they didn't have enough firepower to kill off all the warriors because there was too many of them. So I always tell people, you cannot defeat a country from the outside by attacking it. You have to be on the inside. So this is where I'm telling you, they use Christianity to get the elite's mind, and then they use it against their own people. And then what happened now? The elites, once a king go against the elites, or a ruler go against the Christianity, it takes time, and it's not something that happened overnight. It takes 10 years, 20 years, sometimes it takes a century for them to get that king overthrown and get enough people of Christian to call the Portuguese brothers and the enslavers, call them brothers, and they invite them in, and then slowly but surely, it's like they keep the time. It's like a snail, or let's say a turtle. They move very slowly, but gradually they get to the end goal, which is overthrowing anyone who does not agree with them in Christianity.
Defeated and stripped of his governorship, a bishop replaced him who requested that he be returned to Portugal in chains. Portugal was concerned about a possible Congo alliance with the Dutch that NKANGA was trying to establish. This concern prompted the bishop to negotiate with the Congo king and to appease him. The bishop not only carried a desire to negotiate with King NKANGA, but had probably already been advised to make restitution of captives, as the Overseas Council in Lisbon had decided on 6 April to seek the slaves out in Brazil and return them. In a letter to the Crown of 3 February 1624, de Mascarenhas noted the results of his inquiries and the return of 53 persons to Mbamba, including a female cousin of the late Duke. Over the next several years, the gradual return of the captives unfolded, ultimately resulting in the return of over 1,000 from Brazil. The Portuguese response to this real threat from Congo resulted in one of the few times in the history of the slave trade that so many slaves were returned to their homeland.
Stick up in. The Ottoman Empire takes slaves from Africa in the 13th century, right? But they wasn't as brutal as the Portuguese or the transatlantic slave, which is the Westerners. The Ottoman Empire, when they enslave people, which is enslaved at the time, white people and black people, they charge more money for white slaves than for black slaves. And black slaves from the Ottoman Empire in the 13th century, when they was enslaved, they was only enslaved for 7 years, and then they were released to ingrain in the society. And whites was 9 years after enslavement, they was ingrained in society. But they did treat the black slaves worse than the whites from the Ottoman Empire. As a side note, before I finish this video, they would take the men, turn them into eunuchs, which means cutting their dicks off, and then put them to guard the prostitutes, which was the white slaves. So that means they cannot impregnate them or they cannot have sex with them because they're eunuchs, they're dickless, basically. And this is a side note because the Portuguese were brutal when it comes on to when they enslaved Africans from the Congo. They was brutal. Westerners, same thing, they was brutal. Let's continue.
Surely this was one of the rarest moments in African history. A powerful African king defeating a European-led force, leading to appeasement and to the return of enslaved people. It not only proved African military capacity, but King NKANGA's protest letters to other Christian European nations, his alignment with the Dutch, and his strategic protection of Portuguese merchants seeking asylum prove the existence of...
Stick up in. It's finishing now, so I'm going to finish it there. But so you see, Africa had powerful warriors, and they forced a Westerner to return slaves, thousands of them. So it could have been done, but I think the Westerners, this is my opinion, after what I've learned about history, they make sure that uprising never happened again. So they went at it even more secretive, more calculated. They calculated better than after that, after the 16th century, when they had to return slaves. They said that will never happen again. So what they did now, they started to make alliance with tribes and kings and to give them wealth. And then when the uprising started with between tribes, the tribe that they're alliance with would call them in for help, and then that's how they take their time and overthrow tribe by tribe, ingrain Christianity, destroyed. Because the winners of the war is the one who will write history, and so they will take out all the African tradition, what they can remember and what they study and what they everything, and destroy it, and then enforce the English language, the Christianity, and the English traditions in Africa. French did the same thing. England did the same thing. The Spaniards did the same thing. So that's why you have so many countries in Africa that speak different languages, like French and Spanish. Spanish covering all the different other languages like Portuguese and so forth and so on, and the French and the Creole. And the Creole wasn't by French. Creole was used by slaves to confuse the French-speaking people, and English. So that's why you have that collage of different cultures in Africa right now, from enslavement and from colonization. But if the kings then wasn't so greedy, Africa would never be overthrown by Westerners or Europeans, because as I said, there was powerful in army, it was very skilled warriors, and Africa was already really rich. Right, so you don't know. Anyway, I hope you learned something from this video. You can check out my other videos that I did on slavery. I had around 3 more videos. Go on my channel and you find them and take a look at it. You don't know how it is, you don't know it is. Peace, love, boom.